Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe my channel. I never thought I would find myself in such a situation. My life had always been steady, married for 6 years to a good man with no major complaints, but somewhere along the way things changed. Routine replaced excitement and we became like two strangers sharing a house rather than a life. I told myself this was normal, that every marriage had its lulls and that love could survive without sparks. Still, there was a part of me that longed for something more, though I didn't know what more. Even me, then I met him. It wasn't planned, of course. These things never are. He was a colleague at an office event, someone I'd seen in passing but never really spoken to. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, his smile warm and his words easy. He was the kind of man who seemed genuinely interested in every person he spoke to. When it was my turn to engage him in small talk, I found myself stumbling over words in a way that surprised me. I hadn't felt nervous like that in years. It started innocently enough. We exchanged a few jokes, laughed about the long hours at work, and shared mutual frustrations about office politics. But there was something else beneath the surface, a subtle undercurrent that neither of us acknowledged, but both felt. His gaze lingered just a second too long, and my pulse quickened in response. Later that evening, I caught myself thinking about him, his voice, his laugh, the way he seemed to truly listen. I dismissed it as a harmless crush, a fleeting distraction from the monotony of my life. But when I saw him again a few days later, something shifted. He greeted me with the same warmth as if we were already friends. We started talking more, small moments in the break room, quick chats during lunch breaks. I learned that he was married too, with 2 young kids. His wife sounded lovely, the kind of woman who made casseroles for school bake sales and always remembered birthdays. He spoke of her with respect, but there was something in his tone that mirrored my own feelings, a kind of wistful detachment, like someone recounting a memory they couldn't quite hold on to anymore. One evening, as we both worked late, he offered to walk me to my car. It was a simple gesture, but the tension between us was palpable. Standing by my car, we hesitated, neither of us wanting the moment to end. Then he said something that struck a chord. It's been a long time since I felt like someone really sees me. I knew exactly what he meant, and I should have walked away right then, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded and said softly, I feel the same way. There was no kiss, no touch, no dramatic gesture, just those words hanging in the air between us, like a promise of something we both knew we shouldn't want but couldn't resist. It wasn't long before our conversations grew more personal. The first, it was just casual chats about work and life, but then it shifted into something deeper. He would text me after hours asking how my day was, or sharing something funny that happened with his kids. His messages felt like little secrets, ones I carried close to my chest. Even his guilt started to creep in. I told myself it was harmless, just 2 people connecting over shared struggles, but deep down I knew it was more than that. One evening during another late-night text exchange, he mentioned how lonely he sometimes felt, even surrounded by his family. His honesty disarmed me, and before I realized it, I was pouring out my own frustrations. I told him about the distance in my marriage, the silence that had replaced conversations, the way I felt invisible. He listened without judgment, and that connection was intoxicating. Our stolen moments at work became the highlights of my days, a lingering glance as we passed each other in the hallway, a quiet laugh shared over an inside joke, a brush of his hand against mine that felt accidental but wasn't. The electricity between us grew, and I stopped trying to deny it. The first time it happened, it felt inevitable. We were at a company event, surrounded by people, but the 2 of us were locked in our own little world. Afterward, as we stood in the parking lot, talking, the tension that had been building for weeks finally boiled over. He leaned in and I didn't pull away. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, like we were testing in the waters, but when I kissed him back, it was like a dam breaking. That kiss was a line I had never thought I would cross, but once I did, there was no going back. We both knew what we were risking, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The next day he texted me saying he couldn't stop thinking about it. I told him I felt the same way. And just like that, our affair began. Every stolen moment with him felt like a rush, a mix of adrenaline and forbidden excitement. We would meet in secluded places, always careful not to be seen. Sometimes it was his car, other times a quiet corner at a coffee shop where no one knew us. It was never about the physical side alone, it was the way he looked at me, like I was the only person who mattered. But with every kiss, every touch, a small part of me felt like I was losing myself. I would come home to my husband and feel the weight of my betrayal pressing down on me, yet when I was with him, the guilt faded, replaced by the sense of being alive. Again, it was selfish, I knew that, but I couldn't stop. It wasn't just desire, it was the way he made me feel seen, understood, wanted, and that was something I hadn't felt in years. The cracks began to show sooner than I expected. What started as exhilarating and secretive became suffocating in its own way. We both carried the weight of our decisions, and it started to bleed into our daily lives. I found myself distracted at home, pulling away from my husband. Even more little things he did that used to be endearing now irritated me, and I couldn't shake the guilt every time he smiled at me like nothing was wrong. The first real scare happened one evening when I forgot to delete a text. My husband asked casually who it was, and my heart stopped. I lied, saying it was a coworker asking about a project. He seemed to accept it, but the tension in that moment lingered. That night I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep this up before everything unraveled. At work things weren't much easier. He and I were more careful, but the intensity between us hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. But with that intensity came arguments. We started to clash over small things like how often we could meet or the risk of getting caught. He would get frustrated if I couldn't make time for him, and I started to resent how much of myself I was giving. One day he confessed that his wife had started to notice his distance. She'd asked if everything was okay, and he had reassured her, but the guilt was eating away at him. He told me he couldn't stand the thought of hurting her or his kids. I wanted to tell him to leave, to just walk away from his marriage and be with me, but I knew I couldn't say that. It wasn't that simple. I had my own marriage to think about, and as much as I wanted him, I wasn't ready to throw my life away for something that might not last. Then came the close call that nearly exposed everything. We had met during lunch, sitting in his car, talking and stealing moments of intimacy. What we didn't realize was that one of his coworkers had parked nearby and saw us together. She didn't say anything outright, but the next day at work he told me she had given him a strange look and made a comment about his long lunches. Paranoia set in after that. We became more distant at work, avoiding each other in public spaces. The thrill that once defined our affairs started to fade, replaced by fear and tension. I found myself questioning whether it was all worth it. The moments we shared were still intense, but they came with a price, one that I wasn't sure I could keep paying. At home, my husband started to notice my mood swings. He asked if I was okay if work was stressing me out. I wanted to confess everything to unburden myself from the lies and deceit, but the thought of losing everything terrified me, so I buried it deeper. Even as it consumed me, the double life I was living was slowly becoming unsustainable, and I Knew something had to give eventually. Everything began to crumble. The weight of secrecy and guilt became too much to bear. Every stolen moment with him, once thrilling, now felt heavy with consequences. He told me one evening that he couldn't keep living like this, lying to his wife and risking his family's trust. His words were sharp, cutting through the haze of our connection. I don't want my kids to grow up hating me, he said. I couldn't argue with him. I didn't want to ruin my husband's life either, even if things between us had grown cold. When he said we needed to end it, my heart sank, but I didn't fight him. Part of me knew it was inevitable, as much as I wanted to believe we could somehow rewrite the rules and make it work. Reality wouldn't let us. We agreed to stop meeting, to cut off all contact outside of work, and to go back to being the people we were before. But ending it wasn't as simple as just walking away. I thought about him constantly, replaying every conversation, every touch, every moment we had shared. It was like grieving someone who wasn't really gone. I couldn't delete his messages, couldn't bring myself to erase the evidence of what we'd had. At the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The constant fear of being caught was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that I didn't know how to fill. At home, I tried to repair the fractures in my marriage. My husband noticed the change, how I started initiating conversations again, how I made more effort to be present. He seemed cautious at first, like he didn't trust the shift, but over time he softened. Still, there was an unspoken distance between us, a reminder that some things couldn't be undone. As for him, he stayed true to his word. We kept our interactions at work professional, never lingering too long in each other's presence, but every now and then our eyes would meet, and I could see the same mix of longing and regret reflected back at me. It wasn't anger or resentment, it was an unspoken acknowledgement of what we had shared and the cost of it. The hardest part was coming to terms with the person I had become. I never imagined myself capable of such betrayal, of hurting someone I loved for the sake of my own desires. But in those moments of reflection, I also realized how lost I had been, how disconnected from myself and my needs. The affair wasn't just about him, it was about me, about the parts of myself I had neglected for years. I wish I could say I walked away stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I was, but the truth is I'm still figuring it out. Some days I feel grateful for the second chance with my husband. Other days I catch myself thinking about him, wondering if he ever feels the same. It's a contradiction I'll probably carry for the rest of my life, a reminder of how easily lines can blur and how hard it is to find your way back once they do. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe my channel.